Today I'm going to talk to you about our data platform, HDX, why it started. I'll talk a little bit about the core data sets that we have on the platform and why they're so important. And then we have a couple of new features on the platform like the HDX data grids, explorers, and most important of all is the crisis page that we set up when there's a sudden onset disaster. So the Center for Humanitarian Data is based in The Hague in the Netherlands. It's managed by OCHA, so the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. We're a global team, so what started with just a couple of OCHA colleagues in New York and Geneva has now grown into a team with colleagues in Dakar, in Senegal, in Nairobi. I'm in Bangkok, Thailand, and we have a couple of more colleagues in also in Europe, in Bucharest. So the goal of the center is to increase the use and impact of data in humanitarian response. So what we're striving for is a response that's data-driven. If you have faster access to data, you can do much better analysis, and that will lead to a better response overall. And that's, meeting the needs of vulnerable people during a crisis, and that's what it's all about. So there's 4 work streams in the center. There's data services, data responsibility, data science, and learning and practice. I'm going to just focus now on data services. That's where HDX is hosted. And this is just to show you kind of where it sits within OCHA. So within OCHA, there's the IMB, it's the Information Management Branch. And within there is the center, and then HDX is the platform that's in the center. So it's OCHA's open platform for data sharing. So anyone can use HDX, it's free. The goal of HDX is to make humanitarian data easy to find and use for analysis. It was launched in 2014, so it's 10 years old this June. So HDX is the Google of humanitarian data, and this is music to our ears when one of our partners says this, because the whole reason for setting up HDX at the start was it was really difficult to find data during a humanitarian crisis especially, because you want everything to be quick, right? You need access to data, but it has to be data that you can trust, and you have to know where it came from. So all of that metadata, in the past, it was really difficult to trust the data that you had. And that's why HDX was born, because now every data set that's on HDX has a comprehensive list of metadata to it. So you can see exactly the reference period of the data, where it came from, how often it's going to be updated. And all of this information is essential for you to be able to trust that data. So here's just some numbers from last year. So we had 1.4 million unique users in 2023. They downloaded 2.7 million data sets. So that's a 25% increase from the year before. We have over 220 active organizations now on the platform, and they are sharing over 20,000 data sets. So this is the trend since 2016. And what's very interesting here is the spike you see from 2019 to 2020. And that was the demand for health data at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. And what's encouraging to see there is we've been able to hold those numbers since 2020. So when we talk about humanitarian data, what do we actually mean? So it's we kind of break it down into 3 parts. It's baseline data, so about the context of the crisis. It's situational data, so people affected and their needs. And response data, so data about the actual humanitarian response. So how many people are being targeted? How many people are being reached? But we also welcome any other type of data that would be useful for a response, especially now climate-related data. Because we have now a data science team, and they do a lot of these models and forecasting of and they need any type of historical climate-related data is like gold to them. So here's a sample of the orgs that are sharing data on HDX. It's very diverse. We have private sector like Meta, Google Research. We have HotOSM, who are a massive partner for us. We have UN agencies like WFP, UNHCR, and many others. So here is just to give you an idea of, so each org really is kind of an expert in an area, right? So HotOSM, like they have great geodata like roads, airports, populated places. If we want population density, we look at world pop data. ACLED share really great conflict data. And then UNOSAT, they have satellite imagery. So UNOSAT are pretty much the first organization that we would call when there's a sudden onset, because they would activate their charter and they would give us satellite imagery of those first couple of days after a crisis strikes. So baseline data, I won't spend too long on this, but this is just, so when a crisis strikes, it's really important that everybody is using the same data sets in the humanitarian response. We call these CODs, the Common Operational Data Sets. And it's a core preparedness measure in disaster-prone countries that we have these data sets. They're trusted, they're the best available, and probably most important of all is they're accepted by the humanitarian community. And these data sets are usually managed by OCHA and UNFPA. So here's just so the two core CODs are the admin boundaries and the population statistics. The admin boundaries are usually managed by OCHA, but we would get sign off by the government within that country on which admin boundary data to use. And UNFPA usually manage the population statistics CODs. There's then a whole range of other CODs that are kind of that support preparation and response at the local level. These would be like populated places, roads, waterways, health facilities, and education facilities. And you'll notice that HotOSM can provide all of these. And we have like over 4,000 data sets on HDX just from HotOSM alone. So the data grids. So with having over 20,000 data sets on HDX, the issue then was it was becoming difficult to find data within the platform. So we created this feature called the data grids, and what it is it pulls together the core data sets for countries where there's an active humanitarian response, so a humanitarian response plan. And what we did is we created pages for those countries. So this is an example for Afghanistan. It's broken down into 6 categories. And it pulls together data sets like the admin boundaries, so the CODs. You'll also get like conflict data, funding, poverty rates. So if you just had access to this page and you quickly had to, say, create a map to kind of aid the humanitarian response, pretty much all the data you would need is on the data grid. So we have kind of strict criteria for a data set to be on the data grid. It has to be at the subnational level, right? It has to be a commonly used format, so we don't have like PDFs of reports. It has to be machine readable, and it has to be timely. It has to be the latest available data set. So we also use data to create insight. So if there's a crisis that's big enough, we'll create a data explorer. And what it does, it creates, we create an interactive map, and it's pulling data from HDX. So everything you see on this Ukraine Data Explorer is data that's available on HDX. And it'll show stuff like operational presence, border crossing points, which is very important when you have the movement of people, displacement, conflict events from ACLED are on there, casualties, the latest funding figures. So it's just to give you that kind of bird's eye view of the crisis with all available data. So when a crisis strikes, we also create these kind of quick crisis pages because there's a huge demand for data just on that, and we don't want people to be in HDX and just searching around. We want them to have all of the information together in one place so they can easily find, download, and start using it. So this is an example of a graphic from Gaza. So we have a Gaza crisis page set up at the moment because there's massive demand. But I just want to kind of highlight that especially in a conflict setting, you have to be very careful about what data you're sharing, right? Like, is it going to do more harm than good? You know, especially because there's such high demand. You have media outlets reaching out to you, you have governments, you have everyone asking for the data, but you have to make sure that you can share that data in the right way. You know, there's data responsibility that you have to think about. So on the crisis page for Gaza, we have data like admin boundaries, conflict events, number of people displaced, which is shown here in the graphic. We have data on aid trucks entering Gaza, which is very important at the moment to see what is going in, and commodity prices, which now are surging due to the ongoing hostilities there. So when we set up a crisis page, we kind of have a list of these kind of core data sets that we need to put on there. And this just shows you the data that we would hunt for straight away and the org that would usually provide that type of data. So UNISAT, as I mentioned earlier, they provide the satellite imagery. So this is one from the Gaza Strip. These are very popular on HDX and very useful for the overall humanitarian response. And we also have a partner, WFP Adam, and what they do is they provide these shake maps and these snapshots right after a disaster happens. These are all found on HDX and can be downloaded, and they get updated as more information becomes available. So this might be just the initial snapshot, but it will change as the days go on and more information becomes available. So just a few reflections. So, you know, before HDX, it was very hard to find data. You didn't know what data you could trust. Now it's easier. It's not easy, but it's easier, right? It's so important to be prepared before a crisis strikes. We can all advocate for open data sharing. We want more partnerships on HDX. We welcome anyone who has data that would be useful for a humanitarian response. And it can come from anywhere. It could be private sector, local NGOs, data communities. We welcome it all. So that's it. Thank you very much for listening to me. And we'll go into HDX more in the next session.